All right, deep divers, buckle up, because today we're going deep, like really deep.
Deeper than the Mariana Trench?
Well, maybe not that deep, but close. We're diving into the mind of economist David D. Friedman and his book, The Machinery of Freedom.
Ah, yes, a classic of anarcho-capitalist thought.
It's not just some fringe theory, it's a meticulously argued blueprint for a world without government.
No taxes, no DMV, no public schools. It's pretty radical stuff.
So let's break it down. Anarcho-capitalism. What's the core idea here?
Basically, imagine all services, even things like law enforcement and courts, provided by private companies.
So like instead of calling 911, I'd be calling Dave's Security Solutions.
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that. The idea is that these private defense agencies would compete for customers, offering different levels of protection and legal services.
Okay, so it's not just the Wild West with everyone fending for themselves. But what's to stop these private security forces from becoming mini-governments themselves? Or worse, warring factions?
Friedman argues that competition would keep them in check. If one agency gets too powerful or abusive, customers can switch to a competitor. Plus, these agencies would have a strong incentive to cooperate. Conflict is expensive, after all.
So the market itself would regulate their behavior. That's a fascinating concept. But what about things like contracts and dispute resolution? Would we all need our own personal lawyers just to navigate daily life?
Not necessarily. Friedman suggests competing arbitration firms would handle disputes. Individuals and businesses could choose firms and legal frameworks that align with their values, kind of like picking your preferred operating system, Windows or Mac.
Okay, I'm starting to see the logic here, but let's talk about property rights, the cornerstone of this whole system.
Absolutely. For Friedman, property rights are paramount, can be established and enforced without government through contracts, community norms, reputation, things like that.
So it's a shift from relying on the state to protect my property to relying on my community, my reputation as someone who doesn't tolerate theft, and maybe a really good security system.
Exactly. Friedman argues that private property norms are robust and effective. He points to historical examples like medieval Iceland, where private law and order thrived without a strong central authority.
Interesting. But wouldn't a system like this leave the poor and vulnerable at a disadvantage? If you can't afford private security or live in a gated community, are you just out of luck?
That's a common critique. Friedman argues that voluntary charity and mutual aid societies would play a much bigger role in this stateless society, filling the gaps and providing a safety net.
So a lot of faith is being put in the generosity of the wealthy and the power of community to step up.
Yeah, it's a big bet. But he believes private charity, free from government bureaucracy, would be more effective and compassionate than government welfare programs.
I see. So it's about shifting responsibility from the state to individuals and communities. But wouldn't a lack of government regulation lead to all sorts of problems? Who's stopping companies from polluting the environment or selling dangerous products?
That's a key concern, and Friedman addresses it by emphasizing reputation and market forces. Businesses would have a huge incentive to act ethically and responsibly. A bad reputation can be deadly in a free market.
So it's like a giant global Yelp review system where consumers hold the power.
In a sense, yes. Consumers, armed with information and choice, would be the ultimate regulators, more effective than any government agency.
All right, we're getting into some truly mind-bending territory here. But before we go full Neo from the Matrix, let's delve deeper into this market for law you mentioned. How would different legal frameworks actually compete?
Okay, so this is where things get really wild. So imagine a legal ecosystem, like different species of plants and animals coexisting in a forest.
Okay, so instead of one legal system for everyone, we'd have this, like, legal biodiversity.
Exactly. And just like in nature, the most adaptable and efficient systems would thrive.
But wouldn't that create a legal jungle? I mean, imagine trying to do business or travel in a world with a patchwork of different laws and jurisdictions. It'd be a nightmare.
Well, Friedman argues that market forces would naturally push towards compatibility. Think about it. If your legal system is too confusing or incompatible with others, people will simply choose a different one, right? It's like trying to sell a phone that can't connect to the internet. No one's going to buy it.
So the market itself would incentivize clarity and cooperation between legal systems.
Exactly. The most user-friendly and efficient systems would naturally rise to the top.
Okay, that makes sense. But who gets to decide which legal system is best? Wouldn't this just lead to the most powerful or wealthy groups imposing their preferred laws on everyone else?
That's a concern, but Friedman argues that power would be far more decentralized in a truly free market, because individuals and communities would have the power to choose the legal systems that best align with their own values and interests.
So you could have, like, a legal system specifically for tech startups, another for artists and musicians, even one for alpaca farmers.
Exactly. Friedman envisions a world where law becomes more personalized and responsive to individual needs. He believes this would actually lead to a more just and equitable society.
Hmm, interesting. But let's move on to something that I'm sure a lot of our listeners are curious about: taxes. In a world without government, how would essential services be funded? I mean, no more taxes sounds great, but how do we pay for, roads and bridges and fire departments?
Hey there, listeners. If you're finding value in our deep dives and want to dig even deeper, consider grabbing a copy through the Amazon link in the description below. And if you're an audiobook fan, you can dive in with a free 2-month Audible trial on us. Our gift to you. It's a great way to support the channel, explore amazing works on the go, and immerse yourself in these thought-provoking ideas. So, check out those links in the description, and thank you for supporting our work. And we'll keep the deep dives coming.
Well, Friedman proposes a user pays model where services are funded directly by the people who use them through voluntary payments or subscriptions.
So instead of paying taxes to the government, I'd pay directly to my security provider, healthcare provider, education provider, and so on.
Precisely. You only pay for what you use, just like you do with utilities or streaming services today.
Makes sense. But what about people who can't afford those essential services? Would they be left behind?
Again, Friedman emphasizes the role of voluntary charity and mutual aid societies. He believes these private organizations would step up to provide a safety net for those in need. He argues that private charity, free from bureaucratic inefficiencies, would be more effective and compassionate than government welfare programs.
Interesting. A very different approach to social safety nets for sure. But let's shift gears and talk about another big one: education. Friedman advocates for a completely privatized education system, which is a pretty radical departure from the public school systems we have now. How would that even work?
Well, imagine parents having complete freedom to choose the type of education they want for their children. Traditional schooling, homeschooling, apprenticeships, online learning, or even something entirely new and innovative.
So it's like a giant educational marketplace with different options catering to all sorts of learning styles and needs.
Exactly. And just like in any other market, competition would drive innovation and improve the quality of education.
Sounds great in theory, but wouldn't this lead to huge disparities in educational quality? I mean, some kids could end up with amazing personalized education, while others get stuck with subpar options.
It's a valid concern. Critics of school choice often worry about inequality and the lack of a standardized curriculum. But proponents argue that it would empower parents and lead to more effective and personalized learning.
It's a complex issue, for sure, but it's definitely something that makes you rethink the role of education in society. And speaking of complex issues, let's talk about healthcare. What's Friedman's take on that?
Well, it probably won't surprise you to hear that he advocates for a completely privatized healthcare system as well.
Of course. So no more Medicare, no more Medicaid, just a free market for healthcare services.
That's the idea. He believes this would lead to lower costs, greater innovation, and better quality care overall.
Sounds good. But again, what about those who can't afford private health insurance?
Once again, he emphasizes the role of voluntary charity and mutual aid societies. Friedman believes a combination of private insurance, charity, and community-based healthcare initiatives would be more effective than any government-run system.
It's certainly a bold vision. Whether you agree with him or not, you can't deny that Friedman makes you think differently about how society could be structured.
Absolutely. And that's what makes The Machinery of Freedom such a compelling read, even decades after its publication.
So we've covered a lot of ground, and I think our listeners are starting to get a sense of just how radical Friedman's vision really is. From private defense agencies to a market for law, to user pays models for everything from education to healthcare, it's a complete reimagining of the role of government and the nature of society itself.
It really is. He's asking us to imagine a world where individual liberty and free markets are the guiding principles, and where traditional government functions are replaced by private solutions.
Okay, so we've spent the last two parts of our deep dive exploring David Friedman's radical vision of a stateless society. But let's be real. How feasible is all of this? I mean, are we really going to see a world without government anytime soon?
Well, Friedman himself acknowledges that a sudden shift to full-blown anarcho-capitalism is pretty unlikely. It's more of a long-term goal, a direction to move towards.
So baby steps towards anarchy.
Exactly. He believes in gradual change, starting with demonstrating the effectiveness of private solutions in specific areas, like maybe education or healthcare.
So like a proof of concept showing that the market can handle things traditionally done by the government.
Precisely. And as these successes accumulate, the thinking goes, people will become more open to the idea of expanding this model to other areas of life.
Interesting. So are there any real-world examples of this happening, like little glimpses of anarcho-capitalism in action?
Actually, yeah. Think about things like private arbitration, which is becoming more and more popular for resolving business
So
disputes.
instead of going through the traditional court system, companies are choosing to settle their differences privately.
Right. They're essentially picking their own judges and juries, which is very much in line with Friedman's idea of a market for law.
Okay, so it's like a more customized, efficient approach to justice.
Exactly. And then you have the booming private security, industry-gated communities, private investigators, all of that. People are increasingly taking security into their own hands.
Yeah, it's like a quiet rebellion against relying solely on public law enforcement.
And then you have the rise of homeschooling and online education platforms, which, while not purely anarcho-capitalist, do represent a move away from centralized government-controlled education.
So parents are taking more control over their kids' education, opting for more personalized approaches.
And all of these trends, while not full-blown anarcho-capitalism, do point to a growing desire for individual choice and a move away from reliance on government institutions.
It's like the seeds of Friedman's vision are already being planted, even if the full flower is still far off.
Exactly. It's a gradual evolution, a process of demonstrating the effectiveness of private solutions and winning over skeptics one step at a time.
Okay, so maybe a stateless society isn't as far-fetched as it sounds.
And whether you ultimately buy into Friedman's vision or not, there's no denying that his ideas are incredibly thought-provoking.
Yeah, the machinery of freedom really forces you to question your assumptions about how society works and what the role of government should be.
Absolutely. It's a book that makes you think differently, whether you agree with all of it or not.
So is Friedman's vision a glimpse into a possible future or just a fascinating thought experiment? I guess that's for each of our listeners to decide. But one thing's for sure, after this deep dive, you'll never look at the government, the legal system, or even your local school board in quite the same way again.
And if you're intrigued by Friedman's radical vision and want to explore his ideas further, we highly recommend checking out The Machinery of Freedom. You can find a link to purchase the book in the description below.
And while you're down there, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the world of ideas. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.